Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the podcast that looks at the money behind the beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day and I can't see him, but I imagine he's looking quite pleased with a point from the game at Leicester last night. It was Kieran, that was a terrible game. I mean, even the crowd atmosphere gave up halfway through, didn't it? It was, I imagine you're happy, Kieran, aren't you?
Happy with the result. Yeah, I ended up playing top trumps online halfway through it. That was how exciting it was.
Well, that's the mark of a true fan, isn't it? But Kieran, of course, for those of you who are new to our pod, there are new people every time. Kieran, of course, is football finance expert at Liverpool University. The fact that he played top trumps during his own team's game on TV is not the oddest thing about him, as you'll find if you're a new listener. Who did you play top trumps with? Not the Baroness, surely is not a top trumps fan.
No. This was just random people on Twitter.
Of course it was. Yeah, anybody in Russia that we should know about?
Not if the Baroness is listening.
Yeah, because there are certain elements of your life, Kieran, I wouldn't wish to play top trumps with you because I think I might lose. Now, it's Thursday. I'm not going to talk about football too much because we are recording this slightly earlier than normal so I can go and watch Palace get hammered by Liverpool. So I've got a feeling our 4 clean sheets record might disappear. So that's why I don't want to tease Kieran too much. But it's Thursday, so it's not questions day, Kieran. I'm confused. I've got myself all giddy now thinking about Moscow and top trumps. It's Thursday, so it's our news day. Later on, we'll be hearing from top football lawyer Kelly Skeggs, who's been talking with Kieran. It sometimes worries me how many lawyers you know, Kieran, actually.
It sometimes worries me that they seem to have a hotline to my email address these days.
Yes, yeah. Despite when you call them silver tongue lawyers, I'm starting to wonder why. Now, the first story, we're going to the Bundesliga. The Bundesliga we're always holding up as a paragon, a model of how to run a football league properly. And they've been the first major European league to agree a new broadcast deal since the pandemic began. But the broadcasters are playing hardball, Kieran, aren't they?
Yes, the agreement that they've got with Sky and DAZN, who are a streaming site, it works out as around about £4 billion over 4 years. So that's down around about 5% on the current deal. Now, how much of that has got to do with the pandemic? I'm not quite sure, because if you take a look at the current Premier League deal, which is more valuable than the Bundesliga deal, because English football has the benefit of we were first to sell our rights overseas, and of course English is the world's everybody's second language, so therefore it's a lot more familiar than the Bundesliga. The Premier League deal that decreased in value as well for the current round, but it is a cause for concern, especially if you take a look at the Bundesliga deal. All of their Saturday games are broadcast. So it's similar to what we're experiencing at present in terms of Premier League games. And DAZN, they've got the Friday and the Sunday games. There's 9 matches over the course of the season which are going to be free to air, which is good. But I think one of the things which surprised me was that there's no sign of Amazon or Netflix. So you might have thought that, everybody thought that the Amazon experience was a successful one. Yeah. Why are they not dipping their toe a bit further in the water with football rights? But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Oh, you sound like you're surprised.
Yes, I mean, by all accounts, the numbers of viewers were higher than anticipated. Amazon did manage to get the matches for a relatively low fee, and given Amazon's ability to extract every single piece of data out of anybody that's connected with their website or Amazon Prime, you thought that they might have seen that this was a way forward to attract new customers, and therefore go for a new market. And clearly, the German economy is struggling, just as all economies are at present. But even so, it's a fairly lucrative one.
Yeah, I should, before we move on, I'll take issue with your statement that English is everybody's second language, because you've obviously not been to the French parts of Canada. It is, but try getting them to use it. Would this be the usual time, by the way, for them to negotiate new contracts, or has it been brought forward because of the pandemic? Because it occurs to me that it's difficult to negotiate broadcasting contracts when we don't know when the next seasons will even be starting, do we?
Well, this is for 2021-22 going onwards.
Right.
So I think part of the issue why the value's gone down was that the present deal, which is from 2017 to 21, that was an increase of 85%. Compared to the one which was the legacy deal. So you can't keep on getting these huge rises time and time again. Eventually, you reach a tipping point, and I suspect that's where German football is at present. And the Premier League will probably follow suit, because the Premier League, whilst we're just finished the first year of the 3-year cycle, they've already started negotiations for when that's going to be replaced.
Yeah, I might do a bit of digging into that Amazon thing, because, as you know, I worked on the TV show they had, the magazine show that Amazon had for the start of the last season, before they actually started showing football, which turned out to be a mistake. But around about once Boxing Day had happened and Christmas happened, they were very, very bullish about the amount of people that had actually watched it. Not that we actually got anywhere near. I got about 3 corridors close to the Amazon people. We tended to be kept away. We didn't have the access all areas pass that the Amazon people did. But I know a couple of people, so I'll be interested, because that's intrigued me, because we've all been talking about the fact that Amazon are the next big players, and Netflix would be interested because Amazon interested. So is it possible that we just don't know that Amazon are involved, or because there's been no announcement to the fact that they're not interested, has there?
Well, looking at these matches, the fact that Sky have got 200, DAZN have got 104, and the free-to-air are 9. I mean, normally you'd announce everything at the same time.
Right.
And if this is the case, this will be blocking Amazon out of the German market until 2025, which is a long time in football broadcasting.
Right, so we're still specifically talking about the German market here rather than the UK market.
That's right. I think the UK market going forwards, Amazon must be very pleased with what they've had. And also, by all accounts, the price they paid was bottom dollar. So whether the Premier League will be trying to extract more cash for a renewal, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, cancel what I said about doing some research with Amazon. If it was for the UK football, I think it'll get way too confusing if I try and contact some Amazon people I've barely met to ask them why they're not getting involved in German football till 2025. So we'll let that one go for a moment, Kieran. Bristol Rovers is a club we haven't talked about for a long time, but there's been some big changes this week.
Yes, the Bristol Rovers owner, which was the Al-Qadi family, they're Qatari based, and they were running Bristol Rovers from a company called Dwayne Sports, which was registered in the Channel Islands. So, your initial thoughts is this sounds slightly uncomfortable, but one of the family has effectively bought out the rest. This is Wael Al-Qadi, and the good news, I think, from the club's point of view, was that Bristol Rovers, that they've been losing since they got to League One, and Bristol Rovers had a bit of an up and down time. They ended up in the National League, but they bounced back from that. They've been losing £10,000 a day for the last 3 or 4 years.
A day, okay.
So on the back of that, the owners have been lending money, and they were charging interest on that. But what the new owner, or what the new member of the Al-Qadi family has said, is that he's going to write off £18 million worth of loans. He's going to write off £2 million worth of interest, which was owed by the club to the owners. And that's got to be a step in the right direction. They've got new board of directors. They've got some commercial people involved. So I think it gives the club's fans a little bit of comfort from that, because there has been talk of takeovers, and the fans were worried that the Al-Qadi family might pull out their interest. And going forwards, I think the most important thing for Rovers fans is that he does seem committed to finding them a new stadium. They've been playing at the Memorial Ground for a few years, and I can remember going to Bath to see them play back in the mid '90s when they gave Brighton yet another spanking as an away fan. So they do need a new ground, just like all clubs. You need somewhere to call your home. There's certainly far more positives than negatives from this.
Yeah, well, I remember Eastfield, the old stadium, and that was that was I think quaint is the nicest word you could use for it. If it's possible to do this briefly, Kieran, I'm just intrigued by the process by which a Qatari company gets involved with Bristol Rovers. I mean, is this one of those things where they're just looking to get involved in English football and can't afford the Premier League, or will Bristol Rovers have been touting themselves? I mean, how does that work? Because it's a long way from Bristol to Qatar, even in a global economy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Wael Al-Qadi, he went to Westminster School and he became interested in football. I think initially he was a Chelsea fan, doing his studies there, and he just became a huge football fan. Wanted to buy a football club. Bristol Rovers came up on the market and the family decided to buy it. I mean, he comes from a very wealthy, successful family. They've been involved in banking in Jordan, in the Middle East for some time, and they decided to have a go. A bit like some of these things, which are family enterprises, you've got some members of the family who are more interested than others, but he does seem to want to take the club forward on this.
Good. Well, that's good news for Bristol Rovers fans. Less so for our next club. Now, sometimes Guy, our producer, will do a little statement that includes the question that he wants to be asked, or the story that he wants to discuss. Sometimes there'll be almost a haiku that will introduce a story, and sometimes it's just a terse couple of words. And these words are some peculiar goings on at Oldham. Now, a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, a writer called Chris England, is an Oldham fan. I bumped into him in Streatham Common Sainsbury's just the other day. It's a little insight into the glamour of my life. And we had a socially distanced chat about Oldham. Peculiar goings on is not exactly how he put it. I think, like many Oldham fans, he's not a happy bunny. So what are the latest peculiar goings on?
Well, in February, Oldham published a set of accounts. Now, these were unaudited, and they were the cut-down accounts, which instantly gets them onto my naughty step, as you know. But it did show that they'd made a profit of £5.5 million that year, which seemed pretty impressive. And they had cash of 260 grand in the bank. So both of those look pretty good. Now, as an accountant, I know that when somebody asks me, what's the profit figure? My standard answer is, well, what do you want it to be? When I used to,
I might get you to do my accounts. I'm starting to think Bobby Numbers, my accountant's too honest for my own good.
Well, certainly when I used to work in Moscow, I used to produce three sets of accounts.
Three sets of accounts. One was for the shareholders. One was for the tax authorities, because you can bribe the tax authorities quite easily. So you'd negotiate a bribe for the tax officials in Russia,
and then you'd put in a nice low figure for your profits. And then thirdly was for the local mafia, because they offered us. They came to visit us one day and said, "We're going to offer you fire insurance." And the way that it works is that we had to give them 25% of our revenue, and they didn't set fire to the building, because that's how Russia works. I mean, it really is a mafioso state.
Well, to be fair, Kieran, you were brought up in the Elephant and Castle, so this is not a concept that's entirely new to you, is it? Let's be fair.
No, that seemed perfectly natural. So therefore, of course, I was under pressure to perhaps reduce our official revenue figures for them. So it was always, my spreadsheet was working overtime, trying to maintain three sets of books, but we managed that.
No wonder you needed those special cuddles at night as well. Sounds like a very stressful job to be an accountant in Moscow.
It is indeed. It is. But the one figure you can't really fiddle in accounts is cash, because you look at a bank statement and you say, well, yeah, that's the amount of cash we've got in the bank. On the 12th of June, Oldham replaced their accounts at Companies House. Oh. And the profit went down from £5.5 million to £2 million, and the cash went down from £261,000 to 6,000. And I'm going, well, yeah, that's a hell of an achievement. Because if you think about it, you've either got money in a bank account or you haven't.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the first one's not something I'm really familiar with, but the second one, yeah. Is this totally above board? Are you allowed to just replace accounts like that, willy-nilly? I was under the impression that once your accounts had been registered or whatever, that they were your accounts.
Well, if you found an error or something of that nature, then you are allowed to replace them if that's been approved by the board of directors. Right. But the club says it can't afford to have the accounts audited. So, okay, that's fine. I can understand that they don't want to spend money on external costs. But if you can't get your cash balance right to £250,000 for a small business, that does sound alarms. It looks as if they're sort of using the random number generator that the EFL use for points deductions.
Well, there are two things here, Kieran. It's becoming clear that more football clubs need to listen to this pod, because then they wouldn't just replace accounts willy-nilly. They'd all be going, hang on a second, there's this one idiot out there who's checking everything. We better make sure this is above board. But if it rings alarm bells with you, Kieran, I don't understand why it's not ringing alarm bells with HMRC, for example. I mean, surely they will have recognised this discrepancy and be wondering where this money's gone, won't they?
Well, possibly, but we don't know what's been submitted to HMRC. But you would expect them to be certainly raising a curious eyebrow. I was contacted by Push the Boundary, who are sort of an Oldham fans group, in February, asking me to sort of review the accounts from an independent perspective. And I do that. I never ask for money for these things. I do it because I'm a football fan first and foremost. Yeah. And they went to the club, and the club rejected that because the club thinks I'm a dodgy character.
Well, my mistake. They do listen to the podcast then. So now this is where I'm getting slightly confused, because obviously this is a gap in my knowledge. So I would have assumed that the accounts that are logged with Company House would be exactly the same as the accounts that are logged with HMRC's. But is that not the case? So, I mean, they will just give HMRC this is what we earned, this is what we spent, now tell us how much we paid in tax. So the HMRC aren't looking through their accounts in as much detail as you then?
Well, presumably they have submitted something to HMRC. It could be that they submitted to Companies House and they hadn't got round to submitting to HMRC. But it does seem very strange, for profits to fall by 4 million and cash by such an amount. You are allowed to resubmit to HMRC if you notice that there's been a change in some numbers or there's been a disagreement at the board level. So HMRC are not unused to this happening, but it's not something which would happen on a frequent basis. And I suspect it would mean HMRC, in my experience, have always been very fair. As long as you don't try to do anything too ridiculous, they'll accept your word on things, and they won't investigate 99% of what they see coming through as submitted to them, because they are so busy. But with something like this, you would think they might want to query some of these numbers, given the huge impact on profits. Having said that, because Oldham have lost money over so many years, I suspect they wouldn't be paying any tax anyway.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with you for the most part about HMRC being fair, although there's one bloke at Fleetwood a couple of years back. If I ever meet him in a dark alley, we might have to have words. But for the most part, all the rest of them, really nice people. And Customs and Excise, who I'm on first name terms with quite a lot. One last question on this replacement accounts theory, because this is the first time I come across this concept, Kieran. So there's no legal requirement for them to explain why this discrepancy has happened. There's no legal requirement for them to say, these are why we're replacing the accounts, 5 million quid slipped down the back of a sofa, or we bought a player, or we miscalculated. No,
they can just say that we've revised our numbers, and on the back of that, here's a new representation of what we think the accounts are.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting one. We'll keep an eye on that, because I bump into Chris quite a lot in Sainsbury's, so I'm sure we'll have ongoing information on a daily basis. Now, the Cardiff chairman, I think, has been listening to this pod, Kieran, because you've used this potential valuation a few times, but he reckons that up to a third of Championship clubs could be sold for £1 in the coming months.
Yes, this is Mehmet Dalman, who is the Cardiff chairman. And he's saying that the Championship, as we've previously discussed on many occasions, is a really tough league. First of all, from a football perspective, but from a financial perspective, it's a nightmare. I checked my spreadsheet this morning, And on average, clubs were losing £485,000 a week in a pre-COVID environment. So you can see there must be at least a handful of club owners who are saying, well, I just can't carry on this. My personal circumstances have changed. So if they sell the club for £1, it means that they're not having to write out that cheque for 485 grand a week on top of it. So they're just getting rid of a problem. That football clubs are effectively now becoming white elephants for many owners.
Yeah, this is the part of the pod where, for new listeners, I pause while they turn to their mates and go, £485,000 a week? Because it took me 3 or 4 pods to get my head around the fact that you were talking about a weekly figure. That's all. So we've got more news to come, but right now it's time for our interview with sports lawyer Kelly Skeggs. Now, Kelly has worked with Hull City, Bristol City, Ipswich Town and Spurs, amongst others, and is also a top table tennis player. And she spoke to Kieran earlier this week.
Welcome to the show, Kelly. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me, Kieran. I'm delighted to be here.
Jolly good. And you're keeping safe and well in this crazy world of ours at present?
Yes, it is a crazy world. Luckily enough, I'm able to do my job from home. So whereas some people have been able to take a little bit of a backseat, I've been very much forefront of the cuts and deferrals and furloughs, etc., that have been going on. So, my world's been pretty manic. But yes, very safe. Thank you.
Great. So, looking at it from the point of view of an agent, so in terms of representing players, and so we look at things in general rather than specific. How do you see the transfer market over the course of the summer in terms of, first of all, transfers and transfer fees, but secondly, perhaps more importantly, for contract negotiations on behalf of players themselves?
Well, it's a question that's at the forefront of everybody's mind at this point in time, and something that's regularly discussed on a weekly basis, certainly internally for us. At the moment, it's just speculation, really. We can only have a look at, we're coming off the back of a declining market from the last 2 or 3 windows as it is. So what we're hearing from clubs is the reduced budget, obviously, because of the lack of income that they're going to be getting from match day income. There was some talk about a percentage of 25% being bandied about in reduction of transfer fees and wages, but obviously we'll have to wait and see on how that is. I think top level signings are still going to happen. The Premier League are going to be the least affected by this because their match day income is a smaller proportion of their overall income as compared to the other 3 divisions. So in terms of the top level transfers, I don't see it making too much of a difference to those, but potentially going down the triangle, we are looking at a fairly depressed market, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that seems to be in line with what we're seeing. Timo Werner's gone for his buyout fee. We saw Arthur go from Barcelona for a high fee. So you're absolutely right. The elite clubs, I think, will be the ones which are least affected. I mean, I've just mentioned Timo Werner there, and we've seen him say to his club that he doesn't want to play in the Champions League because he's signing for Chelsea. Ryan Fraser has effectively said thanks but no thanks in respect of Bournemouth. These are month-long or short-term offerings to players. And can you understand from the players' perspective why the players might be declining the additional contracts from players from clubs on a short-term basis?
Well, obviously we're having to deal with a few of these ourselves. The issue that you've got, and it very much differs from player to player. If you look at Timo's case, for example, he's an incredibly high value worth player. If he was to sign a month-long extension and he was to get injured within that time, then his value would take quite a significant drop, which would be reflected in either a transfer fee and his wages. If you think about it, they've had 2-3 months off. They've been given a basic fitness program, but no training, no match practice, no prehab. They've been asked to come in with a couple of weeks, but that's not really proper training because some of it's been non-contact in small groups, etc. So they're going to be asked to play within a 6-7 week period 9 games of football on the back of a very reduced training and fitness schedule. So there's a significantly increased risk of injury to them in that period of time. And it's very much player dependent on whether or not you take that risk. And it's a heavy discussion between an agent and a player and his close circle as to whether or not he's going to take that risk. And obviously Timo decided and Scott decided that wasn't worth the risk. But if you're a player in League One or Two and you're out of contract, then some players are saying, well, I need to be in that window. I need to put myself out there in that market so that clubs are able to see me and what I can do and bring my identity to the forefront of that particular market. So it's very much dependent on the player.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're saying that there's clearly a difference between the elite players and the players who are further down the pyramid in terms of their future careers and earnings potential. Do you think sort of in general what we're seeing as a result of the coronavirus will be the gap between rich and poor growing even wider? And certainly it has been growing in recent years because the big clubs are the ones signing the big commercial deals and they're getting even more of a lion's share of TV money.
Yes, as you rightly say, I think we've been seeing that for a number of years now, and the top 6 are clearly dominating. I think, 190 million at the last watch between the top 6 and the revenues of Everton, for example. But obviously we're now in this market post-COVID-19, but you're also now looking at salary capping that's being discussed in the lower leagues. And how that and what effect that will have on the market, and whether or not the Championship vote to have that in or not is another question. But what you're going to see if that comes in is very much a balance to the lower divisions, which I then think will create a bigger divide between the Premier League and the rest of the lower leagues.
Fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of turning away from sort of the transfer. I'm here, myself and Kevin, we're both pub lawyers, so we've got zero legal knowledge whatsoever. But there has been a lot of debate between certainly different fan groups in respect of the position that we find ourselves as fans in terms of season tickets. So we're wondering if we could pick your brain, as you've got more of clearly you're from a legal background, in respect of the position with regards to refunds for season tickets. Are clubs legally obliged, do you think, under sort of consumer protection law, to give the money back if the fans want it? And we are seeing many fans turning around and saying, well, thanks, but no thanks. We're more concerned about our club surviving. But clearly, everybody's personal circumstances are different, and some people might need the cash. Some clubs have flatly refused to give refunds, for example.
Interesting topic of conversation. I think, as with a lot of decisions that clubs have to make in these scenarios, the legal position only stands as your starting point, really, because the legal rights are only ever enforced if somebody takes it to court. And in this sort of scenario, we're talking about, for individuals, fairly small amounts of money. But obviously, as a collective for the club, it's a vast amount of their income, especially as you go down the leagues. So it's a huge commercial decision for the club in terms of their revenue, but also in terms of fan happiness, essentially, because what they need to decide, you start off with what they're legally obliged to do, but then they have to make a commercial decision behind that. The difficulty that you have in any scenario here is that the terms and conditions, when you buy a season ticket, you're entering into a contract with the club essentially for services. And everybody's terms and conditions are very different. So Arsenal's terms and conditions, club reserves the right to reschedule any match or, if necessary, play the match out of view of the public without notice and without any liability whatsoever. So in terms of the legal position, it will differ from club to club depending on the terms and conditions. But when you look at the club stances, it will be very much dependent on a financial and a commercial decision rather than a legal decision. What we're seeing is the Premier League clubs are tending to refund based on a proportion of the matches that haven't been played. Lower down the leagues, you're looking at creative refunds in terms of, okay, well, we'll give you a credit with the amount of proportion that hasn't been played, and we'll put that towards your next season ticket, or we'll put it towards retail or merchandising, etc., because the reliance on their income is significantly higher than it is for the Premier League clubs.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much. And just sort of one final one. I mean, we are in this crazy coronavirus world at present, and clearly health issues are preeminent. Have you found yourself to be busier or quieter than in previous years, in the sense that clients are going to need more advice, or is it because the transfer market hasn't yet taken place that everybody's sort of just having a watching brief and waiting to see if somebody's going to break ranks?
In terms of what, Kieran?
In terms of negotiating transfers and contracts and things of that nature.
Okay, so you've got the players that were out of contract on the 30th of June this year. Some have obviously been asked, the deadline was yesterday, for their month extension to take them to the 31st of July, the Championship now the 4th of August for playoffs. That's obviously been busier than normal because we wouldn't obviously have to go through that. So that's a significant chunk of time being taken up with that. Previously, in the last few months, we've had to deal with many clubs requesting a deferral. So the negotiations between the players and the board in terms of which percentage of salary is going to be deferred for which month and when that's going to be repayable. The furloughing for the lower leagues, that's taken quite a lot of explanations as for us to the players to explain what it means. Some clubs have agreed to pay 100% and to top up the government's 80% contribution. Some clubs haven't. What that means if a player takes a deferral and if you're out of contract, what does that mean for them? Whether or not the club are going to continue to pay any additional bonuses. That's also been quite a heated topic of debate. But in terms of, I think the clubs are changing potentially or waiting because they don't know what their budgets are until they know when spectators are going to be back into the stadium. So what playing budget the recruitment first team squad have is still uncertain for a number of clubs. So until they get that sorted, it's difficult to push forward with transfers. But obviously speculation remains there and the work behind the scenes still goes on. They still have their primary and secondary targets and the positions that they must fill or maybe can fill if they get one out and get one in. But I think the big difference is going to be the players that were on the list for out for sale. Maybe clubs might change their mind because the value is going to have taken a dip, and the replacement value, they're probably not going to be able to find a player to replace them for the amount that they've got. So they might be keeping players that otherwise would have been for sale. And I think transfer fees are going to take a significant reduction. Lots of clubs are saying they're not going to pay transfer fees at all. So it's going to be very much out of contracts and loans that we're seeing more of.
That's brilliant. That's really useful. So it's going to be a tight, tough market by the sounds of it. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. By the sounds of it, you're incredibly busy, so we appreciate you taking your time out. Stay safe to you and your family and your loved ones, and have a listen to the show, of course.
Yes, thanks, Kieran. I definitely will every week. Thanks for having me.
It's always good to hear from people outside the actual accountancy bubble, Kieran, isn't it? And Kelly had a lot of interesting things to say, but still on legal matters, and this is not something we could particularly ask her about for obvious reasons. Sheffield Wednesday's battle with the EFL kicked off this week.
That's right, and this has been rumbling for a long time.
Since we started the pod, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were originally charged in November 2019 with regards to issues relating to the sale of Hillsborough. The EFL said they then had extra evidence in December 2019, and then we've had radio silence. So, yeah, we're 6 months further down the line. But my understanding is that the hearing has started this week. And part of the reason for that is that other clubs in the Championship are getting increasingly concerned that they want to know where they stand. And this is especially coming from those clubs who are close to the relegation zone. So the likes of Barnsley and Hull have been pressing for this because Sheffield Wednesday could be looking from anything from a zero a zero deduction, because they could, of course, be cleared by the panel, up to a maximum of 21 points deductions, which would, of course, throw them into the mixer as far as the relegation fight was concerned. So the reason why Barnsley and Hull want to know is because you might be going into the last 2 or 3 fixtures. And, of course, we all know, sometimes you need to win a match. Sometimes you'll stick 10 men behind a ball and you'll stick for a 0-0 draw, because that might all be required. It is a cause for concern that these cases are taking so long to resolve. This actually relates to the sale of Hillsborough sometime in 2018, and we're 2 years further down the line, and we're no better off in terms of making a final decision. It also could be the case is that if there is a points deduction, or if there isn't a points deduction, either Sheffield Wednesday or the EFL could appeal the case, as we've seen in recently in respect of Birmingham City and Macclesfield and so on.
Yeah, well, I think Barnsley and Hull fans listening to this will be of the same mind as Stevenage fans were about Macclesfield, that if there is going to be a points deduction, again, no pun intended, it's absolutely pointless if that points deduction doesn't materially affect their place in the league, because that's no sort of punishment at all. Essentially, if they get a 2 points deduction that takes them down from 8th to 10th, it's annoying, but it's not a punishment. And I'm sure Barnsley and Hull fans would think the same way, wouldn't they?
Very much so. That the Championship's not like the Premier League, where each position is worth £2.5 million in the table. You just get a flat fee. So there is no difference to a certain extent between 8th and 18th.
Yeah, now, Sheffield Wednesday, one of the clubs we talked about in the first couple of pods, and I think this is one of the countries we first talked about as well. Annoyingly for both of us, given our background, the Football Association of Ireland has started legal action against its former auditors, Deloitte. Remind us about this story, Kieran.
Well, the Deloitte wouldn't sign off the accounts effectively in 2019 because they said that the FAI, the Football Association of Ireland, hadn't been keeping proper accounting records. Now, as with your discussions with Bobby Numbers, he'll always tell you, keep your receipts, make sure that you've got evidence of all money that you're paying out in respect of your career and the way that you conduct yourself as a professional. The same should be the case for football clubs, but even perhaps more so for a football association. They are supposed to be setting a standard. And it appears now that the FAI ended up with debts of around about 55 million euros. And there were lots of issues to do with expenses, where records were not being kept. They appeared to loan 100,000 euros to their former CEO, John Delaney, who's not very popular with anybody in Ireland. And on the back of that, the board of the FAI resigned en masse in 2019, and Deloitte themselves, who'd been the auditors for 23 years, they resigned 6 months ago. But you would have thought that if this was sort of a systemic issue in terms of the FAI, that the auditors might have spotted such issues going back a few years. So, why did it take them 23 years to realise that potentially there were things that weren't great? So, on the back of that, I think we've got a new board of on the FAI, and I think they're trying to recoup some money back from the auditors.
So basically, the legal action is on the basis of that they should have spotted discrepancies and didn't report them. Is that the case?
That's correct, and auditors will always claim that they can't spot fraud. They're not there to spot fraud.
Yeah.
They're merely there to make sure that the accounts look reasonable on the basis of the information provided to them. And if there's a big fraud taking place, it is a challenge really to find the unusual things. But at present, everybody's pointing fingers at each other. And like all of these issues, if we look at Sheffield Wednesday and the FAI, the only winners are going to be our friends in the legal profession.
Yeah, and of course, 30 or 40 years ago, if you talk about the English FA, the Scottish FA, the FA of Ireland, you would tend to make allowances because a lot of the people running them were amateurs. They were people from the county FAs who were volunteering, but it's not 30 or 40 years ago. These should be professional organisations, and they have been for quite some time. So this is it's an unforgivable thing to have allowed to happen, really. Ireland's not a backwater. It's not, we would laugh it off if it was one of the tiny European countries that we'd barely heard of. We shouldn't laugh it off, but we would. But, Ireland is a modern, sophisticated Western European country, and there's absolutely no excuse for this, is there?
No, none at all. I agree with you entirely. I think as something, we both got Irish family and Irish connections, and I can assure you that my extended family, which of course goes into as many hundreds as I suspect yours does, they're just embarrassed. And you want to think that your football association, you might disagree with many of the things that you do, but this is a bit humiliating.
Yes, a little bit embarrassing. Back to a club, and it's a ladies' football club now, because Gillingham Ladies Football Club have become an independent entity from the ex-parent club, haven't they?
That's right, and I think we sort of touched upon this in the last week or two. I was concerned that clubs were looking to do cost cutting. So effectively, what Gillingham Football Club have said that Gillingham Ladies are running at a loss. And therefore, they've effectively severed all ties with them. They were in the National League South. They were playing at Chatham FC. And my concern would be that the women's football game has been growing in the past few years, and it would be a setback. And fair play to the people who are involved with the club sort of on a more day-to-day basis. They've said, right, well, if that's your attitude, we will go independent and we will try to be self-financing. But they are going to find it's going to be a challenge, of course, because you won't be able to attract a paying audience until we get some form of all clear from the government.
But on the other hand, I would have thought, looking at it more positively, that the women's game would be more attractive to some sponsors, I'm guessing, than the man's game probably would. I mean, it's more child friendly, for want of a better word. It's a much safer environment even these days to go and watch football. It's an attractive, open game. I would have thought they'd be a decent prospect for, especially smaller companies who have got no way of affording to be involved in the man's game, if you want. So maybe they should be looking to exploit that maybe sell it as a slightly different product.
Yes, I think there's certainly an opportunity there. Whoever's in charge of their sort of marketing and commercial, like everybody in present at football, is going to have their work cut out.
Yeah, of course.
But you've got to approach it in a positive manner. I mean, the worst thing that could have happened would be that everybody said, well, we've been jettisoned, we're going to kick it into touch. But you've got to give a lot of credit to the fact that the team and I think the manager have decided, well, we're not going to accept that, and we are going to try to run ourselves as a football club. It will be tough, though, because the WSL is competitive, and because they're in National League South, there's a few tiers of the pyramid that they need to climb before they can start to get the bigger sponsors.
Yes, have a good weekend, everybody. I hope your football team wins, unless you're a Liverpool fan, of course, tonight. And Kieran's got a little message for you, 2-word message, haven't you, Kieran?
Stay safe, boys and girls.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
The price of football. The price of football.